Good morning, everyone. Hello. Hopefully you can hear me and see me. Let me stop sharing my screen. There we go. That's better. Good morning. Let me just check to make sure that, oh yes, I'm very much visible. So that's good. If you can see me, do say hello. I'm Chrissa. I'm the founder of Sunshine Support, and I'm going to be doing a Facebook Live this morning all about trauma. What a lovely topic for first thing in the morning. So if you can see me, do say hello. Because I am constantly moving around locations at the moment, and it does make me a little iggledy-piggledy. Is that a neurodivergent thing? You know, moving around locations, not feeling settled. Do say hello if you can see me. Good morning, Summer. What a lovely name. Very apt for this weather. So if you can see me, say hello. And of course, by all means, share where you're watching from as well. It's always interesting to know where everybody is watching in from. Like I say, I'm going to be talking a lot about trauma this morning. Morning, Emma. Morning, Rachel. Morning, Lauren. Oh, there we go. Lots of people can see me. Can you hear me okay? We've got all the fans going and all the windows open. So hopefully you can see me and hear me. Summer's watching from Cornwall. There is absolutely no better place to be in the sunshine than Cornwall. Absolutely love it, place. Absolutely love it. I'm glad you can hear me okay. Right, let's get myself set up and sorted. Hi, Claire from Bicester, my favourite place to go shopping. Morning, Mel. I love the sunshine that you've put in the comments. If you see me looking to the side, I'm just looking at your comments. So do say hello. I'm going to crack on, I promise. We're going to be talking all about trauma today. I'm not going to make it triggering, so don't worry. I just want to sort of cover what is trauma, how does it affect us? It's very much an introduction to trauma. Morning, Rachel from sunny Essex. But yeah, I'm just going to be talking about trauma and the fact that we have all experienced it. And I always find it quite interesting because a lot of people talk to me about trauma and the stuff that I do. I don't traumatize people. Well, I like to think I'm not a traumatic person or a traumatizing person. But lots of people say, oh, yeah, you see, that doesn't really apply to me because I've had an ideal childhood and I don't suffer from trauma. We have all gone through something traumatizing. Trust me, every single one of us. Because actually, even if you were cooped up and wrapped in cotton wool, that can be quite traumatizing. So we have all been traumatized in some shape or form. I can't believe I'm actually laughing about that. I'm trying to make it light, trying to keep it light for you this morning. Morning, Lindsay from Shropshire. How's everybody coping with the heat? Because I'm not. I don't know whether you've been watching my reels, but I do not cope very well with the heat. I don't like the heat. Hay fever, heat, very, very uncomfortable. And I think many of our children feel the same. So anyway, shall we get started? If you know somebody who you think might be interested in this topic, by all means, tag them or share this video with them. The video will be live on our Facebook page afterwards. So, trauma, what is it? I'm going to switch my phone off so I'm not sidetracked. I can see the comments coming in. Total ADHD here. I will get sidetracked. Okay, so trauma, what is it? It can be memorable, so it can be something you remember happening, or it can be non-memorable. It can be a one-off event, or it can be a series of events. And it can be a huge, complicated mix of all four of those things. And everybody experiences it differently. So, and everybody, what might traumatize one person might not traumatize another. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about trauma is that it sort of only applies to soldiers, or it applies to people who have had a serious car crash, or perhaps they've witnessed a serious car crash or something like that, like a big traumatic event. Absolutely, they can experience post-traumatic stress disorder. They can have a trauma profile, which I'll go into shortly. But it's not just reserved for people who have experienced those things. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more this morning. Now, one of the trauma greats, Peter Levine, he says the psychological trauma can happen to anyone when they perceive a situation as a threat and they're unable to complete a satisfactory fight, flight, or freeze response. So basically, what this means is that if we don't defend or protect our nervous system from what's happening to us, so if we perceive it as a danger and we're unable to protect ourselves, it can change us. It can cause a trauma profile. Now, there's loads more to it than that, but I'm keeping it nice and light and simple this morning. So when we see our children, for instance, masking their way through school, and so many people now are being advised to medicate their children for school. This is disgusting, by the way. I cannot believe that we're in a time where we know so much about science, so much about the brain, so much about mental health, and we are being told as parents to medicate our children to get them into an institution. That is actually the black and white of it there. So when we see our children masking, okay, so they go into school and they're fine, you know, like they say, they're fine when they're in school, they're happy. But they're basically too fearful to speak up about what they're feeling or what they're experiencing. When that continues and they're doing that day after day, it can be really, really traumatizing because actually they are being exposed to that day after day, re-traumatized day after day. So when you've got a child who's masking and then eventually they go, I can't do this anymore, and they stop going to school, think about that. That is a response. Their nervous system is actually saying, well, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it. We're not going to do anything. We're going to stop doing all of this. We're going to stop. I'm going to become what society sees as demand avoidant because I cannot cope with what you're putting me through. Now, Betsy Deteri, another amazing trauma great. Do Google all these people. We can put the comments, the names in the comments. Betsy talks about trauma as a continuum. And it's a really fascinating way of looking at trauma to show how it really compounds within us. So basically, again, I'm keeping this very light and simplistic, but from what I've studied and read about Betsy's work, she says that the longer a trauma is left invalidated or untreated or not acknowledged, the more it compounds itself and it becomes difficult to recover from. And all these trauma greats talk about that sort of compounding trauma and what happens. And we're encouraging our children now, aren't we, to cry more, to show their emotion. We've had something really traumatizing happen to us as a family over the last few weeks. And I'm sure some of you will relate to this, but we have two cats and the younger cat disappeared. And we couldn't quite work out why, but he hadn't been well for a few days before. And then he just disappeared. And a few weeks later, our neighbour discovered our cat and he'd gone somewhere for a lie down and he'd gone to sleep forever. And going through this process as a family has been quite an eye-opener because it's all the things that I encourage my children to do and I sort of advise people if they ask me, you know, in terms of emotions and how to coach your children. And we sat there together and one of my children made a joke. She found it very, very difficult and she made a joke and it was really inappropriate, but that was the way that she was showing to me, I don't know what to do with this information. One of them burst into tears and was very much like, my soulmate has disappeared and I'm destroyed. My soul is destroyed. I don't know what to do. And so I encouraged her to just keep that coming. Keep it coming, because until we move through that and we move through that emotion and we allow ourselves to understand what emotion it is and how to feel it and how to move through it, we are not going to ever allow that to move on. And my other child was very much like, I knew it. I knew it. I've been crying every night. I knew something was wrong. I knew that he would have been home. And she was far more sort of what we would probably see in society as sensible, because she was showing emotion, but she wasn't over the top. And she would probably be the most acceptable in a school environment, or the most appropriate. But essentially, she was older and she's been coached a lot in emotional coaching. So all of them, we encouraged them to carry on with whatever they were feeling and whatever they were expressing. And it was a really it was full of energy, actually, that conversation. There was a lot of energy moving between them all, and they were giggling about the lovely things that we'd done together with the cat, but also sharing, how they felt. And I felt very successful at that point as a parent, because I felt how great that they could help each other to move through this period of life, support each other, validate one another's feelings. Because actually, until we're allowed to do that, we can't recover from it. Now, it's not to say that we won't feel sad in the future when we think about our cat and thought of that cat. Sorry, the wind has blown everything off my windowsill. But it's more a case of that we can look back with a far more balanced, healthy way. We're not going to just burst into tears every time we think about the cat. Grieving is a really tricky process, but that validation, acknowledgement of feelings, understanding your feelings, allowing yourself to move through the feelings, coaching one another to move through feelings. By the way, none of my children are psychotherapists, obviously, but they helped one another to do that. So many of us try and toughen up and say, I'll be okay, I'm a tough cookie. And we don't allow ourselves to feel. We don't allow ourselves to move through those emotions. One of my children said to the other ones, this will pass. And it makes sense. Of course it will pass. It's not always going to feel this big. And one of the other things that I talk a lot about in my reels, actually, if you're on Instagram, do have a look for me. I'm under Sunshine Chrissa. One of the things that I talk about a lot is that our body and our nervous system don't recognize things necessarily as good and bad emotions. They see things in size and the impact that it has on cortisol levels, adrenaline levels, all of our hormone levels. And so allowing yourself to appreciate this is a big emotion that won't stay. It will pass, but I've got to feel it in order for it to pass. It's really, really important. And it's one of the best skills that I've given to my daughters, because in the heat of the moment, when something goes wrong, one of the things that they discover, they think about straight away is, this will pass. It feels huge right now, but it will pass. So as for those of us who say, I'll be okay, I'll be a tough cookie, I was one of those, by the way, we're essentially lying to ourselves about the impact that something is having on us psychologically. Now, Bessel van der Kolk, the author of the amazing book, The Body Keeps the Score, you probably heard about this book, and if you haven't, have a listen on your on audiobook platform, or buy the book. It's absolutely amazing. And what he says is the greatest sources of our suffering are the lies we tell ourselves. So when we say, I'll just get over this, we won't just get over it. When we say to ourselves, this is no biggie, I'll be all right, let's not lie to ourselves. And I think, as somebody myself who perhaps went through, well, I definitely went through a few traumatizing things in my teenage years, because I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is an inflammatory bowel disease. And I said to myself, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. I'll get through this. And for years afterwards, I suffered enormously with my mental health, because of discovering at such a young age that I had this very debilitating, potentially life-threatening disease that there was no cure for. And actually, that's a big lie to tell myself. Of course, I wouldn't have known that as a teenager, but I think that's a really important quote to sort of think about. So do you know what happens when we leave our trauma to reoccur? So let's think about our children going into school. If they've got sensory processing difficulties and they find the lights very difficult, perhaps, or the environment very difficult. Every day that they go in, they could essentially be being re-traumatized. So what happens if we allow that trauma to reoccur? Or what happens if we push it down and we don't tend to it and we say, I'm going to be absolutely okay. This is absolutely okay. Bear with me, I'm going to sneeze. Blooming hay fever. What happens to us? Does anybody know? Well, it affects us physically. So that trauma has to go somewhere. And quite often, when I speak to other people who have been to trauma therapy and perhaps are undergoing trauma therapy, and they start to understand how their trauma has impacted them, they discover that a lot of their physical problems came after the trauma. So we see a lot of people complaining about joint pain, about all over body pain, about maybe heart problems, bowel problems. These are all things that are often created from untreated trauma. It also brings about enormous anxiety. And I was chatting the other day to an amazing psychotherapist called Gary Lane, based in Derby. And he was explaining to me that actually anxiety is a physical problem. And I was thinking, a physical problem? This is interesting. And I absolutely didn't, interrupt him. I was just thinking, that's quite an interesting way of looking at it. It's a physical problem. And he said, yeah, absolutely, it's a physical problem. It's a physical manifestation. When we think about it, think about anxiety. Think about it. What do we feel? It's actually all physical. So he's absolutely right. I find him fascinating, by the way. And we chatted about the fact that we don't focus enough on the physical elements of trauma and mental health. We don't think about how did that make you feel? Something that I've seen Gary do is a safety exercise where he sort of discovers where your safe zone is, because for all of us, safety is different. And when you've experienced trauma, without getting too technical, where you feel safe, your window of tolerance moves. And quite often, if you've experienced something that's a little bit chaotic in the trauma, so maybe a child who for instance, a SEND sibling. Let's go with a SEND sibling. So you've got a sibling without SEND who is seeing the constant meltdowns and chaos of maybe an ADHD or a PDA as their sibling. That becomes the norm to them. So then when they live their life in chaos themselves, we say, have they got ADHD? Have they learned behaviors? No, they haven't. We've raised them in this chaotic environment, which makes their safe space something very different to the norm. And we don't focus on that enough. We don't focus on what does safety feel like? What does anxiety feel like? You think about anxiety. It's about your heart racing, your stomach hurts, your head hurts. I know that when I'm talking about something that's maybe some sort of something that's triggered from my past, or something that's anxiety inducing, I feel a lot of strain in my shoulders. So it's really important that we tend to those physical elements because they're telling us things, okay? And I think these are the reasons why so many of us have got long-standing chronic disorders. What do you think fibromyalgia is? You see the sort of criteria around fibromyalgia, and so many people say, oh, I discovered it, or it sort of presented itself within me after childbirth. Yeah, because guess what? Childbirth can be very, very traumatizing. It could be that it presented itself after a car crash. And we think about the physical impact of that trauma, and we go, oh, yes, because I hit the dashboard or whatever. But actually, we don't think about what was the mental impact of that traumatizing event? And did I process it properly? Was I validated? Did I get the right therapy for myself from that? How was it compounded and impacted me in a physical way? Now, my discussion with Gary in particular has really helped me to make sense of so much. And it's quite hard to impress me in this field because I'm well researched. So I've actually invited him to run a webinar in August on this very topic. And, you know, if you are quite interested by the little bits that I've shared with you, I would recommend you go along and have a watch of this webinar. It will be recorded as well. But Gary's going to be talking about the somatic experience of trauma. And you're going to absolutely love him. He's so down to earth. And he's a really brilliant child psychotherapist as well. Very, very highly qualified, extremely experienced. So please do watch that webinar. If this is something that you're interested in, just comment with somatic below, and one of the team will share the link with you so that you can book yourself on. Anyway, I've completely digressed. Well, I haven't really, have I? But we're talking about trauma and the impact on the body. Trauma, like I said earlier, it can affect everybody differently. What affects me might not affect you, and vice versa. It doesn't make me weaker. In fact, neurodivergent brains seem a little bit more sensitive to trauma, because I'm yet to meet a neurodivergent person who hasn't been traumatized by being raised in a very neurotypical world, because the world is very neurotypical. We're getting better. But essentially, just naturally, you know, as I'm sat here this morning, I've got the lights off because I'm finding the light very, very bright. It's very off-putting just from the sun. We're having to open all the windows so everything's blowing. All of my lovely photo frames of my family have just crashed onto the floor, so now I'm worried about them being smashed. We've got fans blowing everywhere. There's a general whir, which is making me want to go to sleep. I've got a fan blowing in my face and my hair's going. We are positioned next to a very busy road here at Sunshine. We're on a ring road, which is very good for getting to us, but not so good for noise. So you think about how much is attacking my senses right now, and the fact that I'm needing to function on this and focus on this. And I think when we think about our children and the fact that, you know, I'm in a nice quiet office here, but actually our children are being expected to do all of that, all these things that I've just said, all of those things happen in a school, plus they've got to sit with 30 other kids, and they've got the pressure of their teachers, sort of making them learn. So that can be quite traumatizing, can't it? And it's a very neurotypical world. There's not much we can change about different things. I can't switch the sun off. So trauma affects us all differently, and many different things can be perceived as traumatic. School can be traumatic. I'm covering that tonight, actually. I've got a webinar. I'm on screen all day today. That's how it feels anyway. I'm doing my webinar tonight on school avoidance, and it's all brand new content. So I've put myself under enormous pressure to rewrite my presentation. So if you've seen it before, this will be covering it from a different angle. So worthwhile looking at again. So that's tonight. If you want the link, just comment school avoidance, and we'll pop the link in the comments. But yeah, so many different things can be seen as traumatizing. Work, like I've just said, can be seen as traumatizing. Friendships can be traumatizing. Sensory overload, social experiences, medical procedures. So much can be traumatizing. I have dreadful PTSD from specific relationships in my life, and also from medical procedures. And I find it really difficult to go into hospitals. And I know that frustrates a lot of medical people that I have to deal with. But I just find it very, very tricky. And the sort of medical procedures that I've had done, because I have Crohn's colitis, are horrible. They're just absolutely awful. And they're very, very painful. So they're very invasive. And yeah, so it stands to reason, really, that I would find them quite traumatizing. My trauma, as with everybody else's trauma, affects the way I function. It affects the decisions I make. It affects where I go, what I do, who I hang out with, the people that I like to be associated with, the colors that I wear, maybe. Sometimes I can be very overly compliant and I fawn too much. And this is because of fear. I overthink things. I'm very, very fearful in certain situations, not many situations these days, but Selective mutism is absolutely not selective. It's very much situational for me. But beyond all of that, it's not just about talking. This is where, with situational mutism, it's very much around not being able to meet your needs in a certain environment. When children are given those passes that they can get out of class to go to the loo, or they can get out of class because they're finding it overwhelming, if they are crippled with anxiety in that moment, they're never going to show that pass. It just doesn't happen. And it's not about verbalizing those needs. It's not about them saying, I need the loo or I need time out. They can't do it. They're overthinking it. They'll be thinking, oh my God, but everybody's going to judge me. I'm going to have to identify myself. I don't really want to identify myself. I just want to blend in, but I'm really struggling right now. I can't hear what the teacher's saying because I'm struggling so much. I really need the toilet. I really need the toilet. I can't go to the toilet though. I can't go to the toilet because everybody's going to look at me. Then I'm going to have to come back into the classroom and everybody's going to look at me. I don't want everybody to look at me. I also don't want to admit. And by the time all of this has happened, quite a lot of our children, they could actually wet themselves. We see this so much. But we're going to be talking a bit about this, by the way, tonight in the webinar. And we're also going to be covering that and selective mutism in our PDA workshop on Friday, strangely enough. So if anybody wants to come to that, I don't know if you've got any tickets, but comment PDA and we'll send you the link. But selective mutism works hand in hand with PDA, PDA being pathological demand avoidance, which currently we think of as a profile of autism, but there's lots of research going into that. But yeah, I with the fawning response, that's definitely something that I do. Other times, my trauma presents itself as demand avoidant, and I might be seen as unreasonable. Now, I'm somebody who comes across very reasonable, but I might say, I can't do that, or I'm not going to do that, and no, I'm not going to do that, or I avoid it, and I do other things to avoid something because I'm fearful of it. And that can be very much a trauma response. So you've got two extremes there. You've got somebody who will do anything to not be hurt again, and somebody who won't even entertain ideas of different things because of the fear. And this is all fear of being re-traumatized. But essentially, they are ways that our brain responds to a perceived risk. Now, again, perceived risk is different to risk, okay? So if somebody, let me try and think. There might be something that happens that I overreact to because I've been traumatized by something similar in the past. Somebody who doesn't understand might go, she's a bit dramatic. She went a little bit over the top then, but my brain perceived that as a risk. So my brain actually acted in the right way. So we've got to remember that. So, when we're thinking about school avoidance, a lot of people think that children are being over dramatic or completely avoidant and a bit pathetic, and oh, why can't they just get over it? Look, they'll get used to it. No, it's all about their brain saying to them, that environment is not safe, so don't go. So we need to reframe the way we look at school avoidance. Now, I feel very, very fortunate that I have found this education of trauma, and it was introduced to me by a lovely therapist that one of my children had called Natalie. And I remember it being a real light bulb moment many years ago now, actually. And I feel very fortunate that not only have I found it, but I have found a brilliant therapist who helps me, continues to help me week on week to work hard on my trauma. I have intensive trauma therapy that is of a very, very high standard, and it's very, very tailored to me. And my therapist is wonderful. And I keep her details very private to me for obvious reasons, but she's wonderful because she continues to learn about different ways to recover. So it's not all about talking therapy. There are so many other ways, and she's skilled in so many ways to help recover from trauma. And I feel very, very fortunate to have her. And I've been doing weekly therapy sessions with her now for about 4.5 years. And I can't ever imagine them stopping. because I see trauma therapy or therapy, altogether as going to the gym. When somebody goes to the gym and they work out and they get to where they feel that they need to be, they can lift a certain weight or they've lost weight or whatever, they've got their mobility there. They don't just stop. They continue to go because they find new weak spots in themselves. They find new ways to develop their physical agility and fitness. And that's how I feel about emotions and mental health. But what we need to understand is that whilst, I can sit here and say that I found this amazing therapist and I feel very, very fortunate, and it's not available on the NHS, which is really sad. So I feel fortunate that I can do that. The longer the trauma is left unsupported, untreated, it is much, much harder to recover from. And one of the reasons that I go weekly is that I've got some very deep set trauma that wasn't validated and it wasn't treated and it wasn't acknowledged. And I'm still working through that and the impact it's had on many, many years since that's happened. So let me show you. I meant to get this out actually before I started. I have got some infographics that we have on our website. I carry them around in my bag. So sensory overload, that can be very traumatizing. You can download all of these for free on our website, by the way. Anxiety in children, again, left untreated, can become quite traumatizing. Low self-esteem. This is a really good indicator, these sorts of things. But trauma, let's go through trauma. So here's my lovely trauma infographic. You can get these. They're on our Facebook page, but they're also on our website. You can download them. If you come into our hub, I know there's lots of people in our hub at the moment because there's a cuppa and chat going on. But if you are local to Derby and you can come into our hub, we have all of these printed out. So you can take them with you and you can take them for wherever you work. But how does trauma present itself? So controlling or manipulative. Remember, this is very much anxiety driven. So if you're in a situation where you feel like it's going out of control and it's making your anxiety worse, then you can then present as controlling or manipulative. We see these words being used to describe our PDA children. Being in denial, being withdrawn, being defensive, lying, stealing, emotionally dysregulated, being paranoid, feeling shamed, having sleep issues, flashbacks, being overly vigilant, like I said earlier about being over the top, having language difficulties, situationally mute, demand avoidant, fidgety, exhausted, fatigued, irritable, overly compliant, like I mentioned earlier, incontinent, angry or raging, memory issues, anxiety. So there's so much, okay? You can download this, like I said, for free on our website. There's so much that it presents as, and it doesn't have to be all of those things. And it can be a real mix of those things. And when they are sort of collide together, they can look like other things as well. Some children present with what we see as adults as challenging behavior. But we need to reframe how we think about these things. You can see from those things how a lot of people are misdiagnosed with other things because actually it takes a very skilled, experienced and expert clinician to understand what is trauma and what is autism, for instance, or what is ADHD. Trauma can look a lot like ADHD. And yeah, it's quite interesting when you start to look into it and you start to unpick it. And lots of it overlaps. Okay, so you can have trauma and autism, So this is why when you're going through your diagnostic process, it's really important to make sure that your clinician has understanding of these things and not just a textbook understands the true impact of what trauma has on us. I mentioned there about things like memory. Trauma does affect our what we call executive function. Now, executive function is there's 7 areas of how we function as humans day to day. And I've mentioned this over in my reels on Instagram, so I won't bang on about it. By all means, go and have a little watch if you're on the Instagram. But your working memory, your memory completely, all of it. Planning, starting and stopping a task, emotional regulation. These are all things that are part of our executive function. Some of us are quite consistent in how they work. Others of us, I smile because this is me, we're very inconsistent. Some days I can remember everything. Other days I can't remember my own name. Some days I'm very articulate. Other days I struggle to string a sentence together. And that is a lot to do with my neurodivergence, but also trauma. And we're learning so much about how it affects our executive function. And it's something that intrigues us here at Sunshine, but we also know it intrigues a lot of the parents. So we've actually got another webinar on that as well. So I'm doing lots of signposting this morning. Even if you just watch this video, I'm sure that you'll come away with it with some nuggets of information to further explore and think about. But if you wanted to learn more and do a deep dive, these webinars that I'm signposting you to will really, really help you. So the executive function and trauma, we're going to be discussing that in loads and loads of detail over 2 hours with Natasha Hallam. Natasha is a specialist speech and language therapist for small talk. She works with Libby Hill. She's absolutely wonderful. And on the 5th of July, she's going to be talking about how children's executive function is impaired because of trauma. And so many of our children, like I've mentioned earlier, are traumatized by life, and just what goes on a regular day. And so they do have a trauma profile. So these webinars are really, really useful for all of us, not just parents, but teachers as well. So if you'd like more information on that, comment executive function, and we'll send you the link in the comments. Then I've mentioned quite a lot about demand avoidance, haven't I, this morning? Demand avoidance and fawning, which sometimes they can happen together. It's a real eclectic mix. But with demand avoidance, this is where we see so many children who have experienced trauma and they have a demand avoidant profile to keep themselves safe. So again, remember, it's that perceived risk. However, people think that they have PDA. And it's not PDA, it's trauma and related demand avoidance. And again, the only way that you can really unpick this is by having a clinician who really, really understands both. Okay, so people like Dr. Judy Eaton, she has written and worked on so many different pieces of research, but also with so many different types of people. And she really understands the difference between trauma and neurodivergence, or PDA, autism, ADHD. Now, with demand avoidance, if you were to throw in something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or also known as RSD, wow. You've got with RSD, well, I won't go on about RSD because actually I'll be here forever, but do give that a Google. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Fascinating. And so many of us relate to it. And actually, the more that we talk about it, we talk about it a lot at work here. The more we talk about it, the more we realize it's not just neurodivergent people who feel this. And actually, it's very common in a trauma profile, very common if the people have PDA as well. And we've actually got the amazing Pete Warmby going to be talking to us about this in another webinar. So if this is something, again, that sparked your interest, that piqued your attention, then please do check out that webinar. He's really, really good at explaining it. Google and you'll watch his videos. It's fascinating. He's coming to do a webinar for us in a few weeks. He's going to be talking about RSD, so rejection sensitivity dysphoria, PDA, and trauma. It's going to be fascinating. So if you'd like to watch that, just comment RSD and one of the team will send you the link. So what I think we can conclude is that there are so many layers to trauma, and it's something that every single one of us needs to understand better, because we're all affected. Our children are all affected. And it is very much a blanket thing that I'm saying here, in the fact that we need to understand how it affects us, because we're all affected differently, but we are all affected. Sadly, trauma doesn't heal by itself, but you don't need expensive therapy either to be able to recover. Now, the wonderful Gabor Mate says that it's not about the qualifications of a therapist, it's about the quality of the connection. So remember that when you think that perhaps you can't help your child with their emotions, you can. You've got the best qualification of them all. You're connected with them. So just remember that. Think about that conversation I had with my children about the cat. I'm not a therapist. I understand probably more than the average person, but I'm not a therapist. What they needed in that moment was safety. What they needed was me to validate their feelings, to tell them it's okay. You're meant to feel this. It will pass, but let's sit with it for a little bit. I feel the same. Having that person say, oh my goodness, if that had happened to me, I'd be feeling the same. Or if you're going through something similar, like with our cat situation, we're going through the same sort of grieving process. I can say to them, I've also cried loads. And I think it's okay to cry. Should we have a good cry together? That feels so lovely, doesn't it? Other than, right, okay, well, let's get on with it now, okay? Yeah, animals die. Let's just crack on. That's just not helping anyone in the moment. That's teaching them to push it down. So let's stop pushing those emotions down. I'm going to come to your comments now. Let's see. Emma says the percentage of autistic individuals and PTSD and trauma has been documented recently as extremely high just for living in a world not designed for us. And this is all to do with recent studies. I can absolutely imagine that. Bear with me. I'm just trying to get your comments because they're not actually coming up on my screen. So let's have a little look. Okay, I can see that there are lots of comments. I just can't see them all. Umbreen says, oh my God, that leaflet Chrissa just shown is a picture of my child's issues. Please, can I have this leaflet? It's the PTSD and trauma one. Absolutely. It's on our website. So just go to sunshine-support.org. You'll see a box that says resources. You can download them. Or if you come into the hub, in our Derby hub, then we've got all of them. There's like hundreds of them, different ones, okay? You can take however many you want. Oh, Charlotte says, I've got a breathing tip for you about executive function. I'll email you, please do. Hyatt says, my daughter had so much trauma from a previous placement, which was non-Section 41, as suggested by the LA. Ange says, oh my God, you've just described both myself and my daughter. I really hope this has been validating, by the way. I don't want to re-traumatize anyone. Marie said, I covered ACEs. So that's adverse childhood experiences within my role as a school designated safeguarding lead. It was a real light bulb moment personally when I attended the training. Absolutely. And one of the things I think that we need to not do as well, not that I'm saying that you have done this, Marie, absolutely not, is I see it a lot with professionals, though, where they see this as they become quite ableist in this scenario. So a professional will go, oh, the poor children. Actually, that's not helping. We need to get on a level because actually, like I said earlier, just because somebody has experienced something that's traumatized them doesn't make them weaker. It also, that whole, I know it's great for songs. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It doesn't. It makes you demand avoidant. It makes you a fawner. It makes you significantly traumatized and physically impacted. But I'm not sure that Kelly Clarkson would have sung that version. Hyatt says, yes, what do you do when your child won't interact with therapy or talking about it, just wants to ignore it? It's so hard. It's too difficult to approach, though. You think about it. I mean, I had something really significantly traumatizing happen to me several decades ago. It took me 12 years to admit that perhaps that wasn't my fault because nobody had validated that experience. Then I was able to start accessing things, but it had to come from me. Now, what I would say is, I think the webinar in August with Gary Lane is going to be perfect for you because Gary uses, he's a working psychotherapist with a caseload. And what he will do is he will talk to you about the different ways that he gets people to engage, because actually it's all about safety. If we don't feel safe, we can't engage. Just recently, I witnessed a teacher, several teachers actually, in the last few weeks, say, I can't help this child until they tell me what's wrong. we've got that all wrong. That child might not have the ability or the confidence or feel safe enough to tell the adult that there's something wrong. It's not up to the child. It's up to us to meet them where they are. And that's what Gary's going to be talking about quite a lot in his webinar. So if you can come along to that, please come along to it, because it's going to be I'm going to be attending it as an attendee. I'm going to be watching. I'm actually on holiday at that time, but I'm going to be watching. Jane says, I've had so much trauma through my life. Absolutely, completely get this. And I think when you start to learn about trauma and what it is and how it impacts you at that stage, you can understand, oh my goodness, there's loads of it. It's not just that big thing. The big thing I've just spoken about, which I will not speak about publicly, the big thing that happened to me, my therapist has heard in one of my first sessions. I was like, this is what I need to deal with. It's the only thing that's ever happened to me. This is what I want to deal with. And actually, over the last 4.5 years, I realized there was lots of things that actually amounted to that point, and lots of things that have happened that are traumatizing since, that have happened because of that. So the impact is far-reaching. Claire says, morning, first time I've been able to join. Good morning, Claire. I'm very, very welcome. I hope it's not been too overwhelming. Claire also says, I think it might be the same Claire, we had a very similar experience with our guinea pigs last year. One child grieved and cried, still does occasionally. The other asked if we can get new pets straight after finding out. Despite emotional coaching and being given lots of space to talk, she just can't talk about or understand negative emotions. It's quite a skill, but it will come. And I think being a good role model is really good. Sometimes I can sit. Well, I was very, very close to my grandfather. My grandfather was my life. Everything I do, I still think, oh, I bet he'll be really proud of that. I feel emotional talking about him. My children have watched me cry and cry and cry over losing my grandfather a few years ago. And I let them watch me. So many of us hide our tears. But actually, they were saying, oh my goodness, Mum, can I fix it? And I said, no, it's not something we can fix. It's just something I have to move through. And I'd love you to sit with me, but I also understand if you can't. And that's okay. And one of my children, who is actually one of the younger ones, who probably won't remember him as well as some of the others, actually has a real strong connection to him. And I think it's because she's wanted to be around me when I'm grieving. I know this sounds crazy, but she feels quite connected to the whole experience. So she also sits and talks about him with real fondness, even though she doesn't have the memories. She only has the memories that I've given her, if that makes sense. But model that behavior. Don't just do it around them. Model it. I talk to my husband a lot about emotions. He talks to me about emotions. We also respect when we don't feel like we can do that. There'll be things in our lives that happen where we can spot that the other one might not be ready to talk about that yet. So knowing that they're not ready, don't push it. But also modeling that to your children is really, really good, because it becomes ingrained. It's a way of life. I think a lot of people come and visit our house and find us quite an emotional family, not in an over-the-top way, just that we express them and we talk about them a lot. And it's quite interesting. Marie says, does that webinar provide some actual exercises? All of our webinars provide things that you can take away with you, that you can actively do. But also remember, all of our webinars have a question and answer section. So whenever you come into our webinars, if you come in with some thoughts or something in particular that you want in specific advice on, you get to tailor that webinar to you. You put that comment in, that question into the Q&A, and it will probably be answered. It's very rare that we don't get round to answering things. And if we don't get to answer them, then we will follow it up with a phone call, so that we try and get as many answers out there as possible. So yes, you will have some takeaway things to do from our webinars, whichever one it was that you were talking about. Catherine says, my daughter has early years trauma and attachment, and as such, is constantly in fight or flight and hypervigilant. I've got a daughter like this, going through the EHCP process at the moment, and I believe I have secondary trauma. absolutely, the EHCP process is significantly traumatizing. I am very triggered by everything to do with it. My first EHCP experience was just short of 10 years ago, and I've continued to be part of that as a parent myself, that process, because I've got so many children. I've got like 500 children. I haven't, by the way. But it every time I go through this process, I feel re-triggered by the last time. And it doesn't matter how much I am validated, it doesn't matter how much I seek therapy and I really allow myself to try and be therapized by this or around this, it's really triggering. So yes, you can have trauma from that. You can become very fearful because of the levels of anger, frustration. And remember, like I said earlier, I think I said it earlier, emotion in your body isn't it isn't measured by good or bad. It's measured by size and the level of hormone sort of damage, I guess, that's happening in your body. So it's really important that we appreciate this. And with regards to the trauma and attachment in early years and how that presents itself, so many of our girls are now being diagnosed as ADHD when actually it could be trauma, because it looks very similar. If you've got a child who's constantly in fight, flight, hypervigilant, can't regulate their emotions, seems over the top, always living in chaos, can create no law and order in their life, can't seem to get themselves sorted, has working memory problems, how much does that look like ADHD? Okay, so you need to think about that. Mel says, I don't know if it's trauma or anxiety. My son has massive, I'm so sorry. I've got speech problems this morning, I think. My son has massive issues over medical issues. He won't take any new medication. He won't have blood tests, which he needs. I believe it's from being seen in hospital since 2. He has lots of operations due to having a chromosome disorder. I swear he has PTSD. It's absolutely possible. Bear with me, guys, because there's somebody at our door. Jess? I don't know if anybody's here. And our doorbell keeps going. Hopefully somebody will get the door because we've got a lot of deliveries happening. So if you're watching this and you're a sunshine person, please get the door. Oh, brilliant. Thank you. I didn't know if you were there. We've got so many fans going in the office. We can't hear each other. Okay, good. Good. Let me see if we've got any other. Alison says, I have to go to work in the moment. Can I catch up? Yes, you can find it on our Facebook page. Will the school avoidance webinar be available on the Academy? Absolutely, yes. All of our internal webinars will always be available on the Academy. How can you distinguish between neurodiversity and trauma? So I've obviously covered this a little bit already, but just to sort of confirm this, it does need some specialist clinicians to understand what's what. Now, one of the approaches that I took personally, so I can speak from my personal experience, I was presenting actually on screener tests as autistic, and it didn't seem to fit for me. I didn't feel like I could identify as autistic. But I could absolutely agree that I had a significant trauma profile and complex trauma. And so what I decided to do was have trauma therapy. And after years and years and years of trauma therapy, I then got reassessed. And actually what was left was ADHD. And that's how I feel quite confident that what I have is ADHD and trauma. Because it didn't sit well with me. So what I always find, and I do this with one of my children as well, a lot of her signs are, she would probably, if she went through the NHS now, she would be diagnosed with ADHD. We're not sure it is the ADHD. We think it's developmental trauma. So we're doing a lot of intense somatic trauma therapy work. And she's immersed in the Sunshine Support world, and she's like a little employee here. And we're going to see in a couple of years what's left. and see if it is ADHD or was it all trauma. Now, this sounds very simplistic, and I'm not necessarily saying, this is the key equation to getting things fixed. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. But it is quite interesting if you manage to heal some trauma and recover from it, then quite a lot of these symptoms or signs or traits or characteristics might fall away. They might not, but it's really, really tricky. But if you wanted to go to someone who understands this sort of stuff, send us a message and we can send you a list of people we would recommend. Then getting yourself assessed or your child assessed by somebody who really understands the difference is absolutely crucial. Rebecca says, I feel like everything you've talked about relates to me and my daughter. We live in a black hole of services and have so far been let down by each one. I wish they could all watch you. The people who need to watch me seldom watch me, Rebecca. It's really sad. I think it's because it's actually holding up a mirror to their bad practice. But do get in touch. I know that we've shared a link for a free call with us, but also come along to our cuppa and chats, because you'll find a lot of information on there. They happen online, but also in person as well. Marie says somatic body work works for stored trauma. Absolutely. And that's why we're doing that webinar, because nobody is addressing this. It's very, very rare and we need to understand it. Claudia says, I can't find the trauma infographic on your website. Others are there, but not the black trauma one you held up. There we go. Katie has posted a link for you. So yes, loads and loads and loads of comments on there. And I've obviously shared quite a lot of information. I've been on here an hour, can you believe? I hope you found it useful. If you need us at all, or if you need any of the links that I've shared this morning or talked about this morning, if you need any information on any of that, just send us a message or comment. We're here to help you. Don't be a stranger. We're here. You don't have to suffer in silence. If you need anything at all, give us a shout. You can reach us on Facebook. I have lots of reels as well on Instagram. We have our Sunshine Support Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, you name it, we're there. Or you can get in touch via our website or send us an email. All the information is on our Facebook page. Don't be a stranger. Don't suffer in silence. Get in touch. We're here for you. That's what we're here for. Have a lovely day. I hope it doesn't get too warm. See you soon, guys. Bye.